I handed her the champagne flute and smiled like I meant it. That was the hardest part, honestly. Not the drive up to Asheville. Not the rehearsal dinner the night before where my son-in-law's mother spent 45 minutes telling everyone within earshot about the summer home in Hilton Head. Not even the seating chart disaster where my daughter's side of the family got put near the kitchen. No. The hardest part was handing Roberta Haynes a glass of champagne and smiling like I was genuinely glad she was about to become family. But I did it, because that's what you do when your daughter is getting married. You tuck everything down deep, you put on the navy dress you bought on sale at Dillard's, and you smile. My daughter, I'll call her my girl, because that's what she is. She's always been my girl. She looked beautiful that morning. Radiant in a way I hadn't seen since she was maybe 7 years old, chasing lightning bugs in the backyard of our house in Knoxville. That same unguarded joy. She'd worked so hard for this day. She'd worked hard for everything she'd ever had. Single-income household after her father passed. State school on partial scholarship. Night shifts at the hospital while she finished her nursing degree. She earned every single thing in her life with her own 2 hands, and I have never once been anything but proud of her for it. Her fiancé, I'll be honest, I liked him fine. He was kind to her, he made her laugh. He called me on my birthday without being reminded. Those things matter. What I didn't fully understand until that weekend was the weight of the family he came from. The Haynes family was old money, not the flashy kind you see in magazines. The quiet kind. The kind that lives in a colonial on 4 acres and never mentions the money because they don't have to. Roberta, his mother, had the particular posture of a woman who has never once had to worry about a utility bill. She wore a cream-colored suit to the reception that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her husband, a tall, quiet man named Sterling, and yes, that was actually his name, spent most of the weekend looking at his phone and nodding vaguely whenever his wife spoke. Roberta had been polite to me during the engagement. Polite in that particular Southern way that keeps everything at arm's length while appearing warm on the surface. She called me Han and asked about my grandchildren, and once, at Christmas, said she thought it was just wonderful how my daughter had made something of herself. I remember standing in their kitchen, holding a cup of coffee and thinking, made something of herself, as if she'd started from rubble. I let it go. I always let it go. That's what mothers do. The ceremony was at a vineyard outside of Asheville, the kind of place with string lights and rolling hills, and a barn that had been converted into a reception hall. It was beautiful. My girl had planned everything herself, every detail, every flower arrangement, every table centerpiece. She'd spreadsheet the whole thing, printed it in a binder with color-coded tabs. That's her, always has been. I sat in the front row and I cried. Of course I cried, and I wasn't the only one. My sister squeezed my hand when they said their vows, and I thought about her father, how he would have given anything to be there, how he used to call her his little engineer because she was always building something, always figuring something out. It was a good ceremony, a beautiful ceremony. Then we moved into the reception hall, and things began to shift. I noticed it first during cocktail hour, the way Roberta moved through the room as if she were hosting, not attending. She kept stopping guests, her guests, the people from their side, and steering them slightly away from my daughter's family. A hand on the elbow, a pivot, a redirect. I told myself I was imagining it. Then came the toasts. Sterling went first, short, bland, harmless. He loved his son, proud of the man he'd become. Welcome to the family. Please enjoy the open bar. Applause. Fine. My daughter's college roommate went next and made everyone laugh with a story about a broken radiator and a very stubborn landlord. My girl laughed the hardest. Good. Then Roberta stood up. She tapped her glass and the room went quiet, and she smiled that particular smile of hers, the one that never quite reached her eyes, and she said, "I just want to say a few words about this remarkable day." I felt something tighten in my chest. I don't know why. I can't explain it. I just knew, the way you sometimes know things without being able to say how. She talked about her son, how she'd raised him to value hard work, integrity, the importance of family legacy, how proud she was of the man he'd become. And then she turned, slowly, deliberately, toward my daughter and said, "And I am going to give you the exact words because I have replayed them in my mind approximately 4,000 times since that afternoon," she said. "And Amanda, we know you didn't grow up with the advantages our family has been blessed with. We know where you come from, sweetheart, and we think it's just admirable that you've worked so hard to get here. We're going to take good care of you now. You're moving up in the world, and we're proud to help you do that." The room applauded. I watched my daughter's face. She was still smiling, but her eyes had gone somewhere else entirely, somewhere far away and very small. I have spent 63 years on this earth. I have buried a husband. I have raised a child alone. I have worked 31 years as a high school English teacher in the same district where I grew up, and I have sat across from parents who told me their children were too good for my class, from administrators who underestimated me, from people who saw a middle-aged woman from East Tennessee and assumed they already knew everything they needed to know about me. I know exactly what Roberta Haynes just did. She did it in a room full of people, with a champagne glass and a smile, and she dressed it up as generosity. But what she actually said was, "Your family has nothing, and you should be grateful we're allowing you in." I set down my champagne flute. My sister looked at me. She knew that look on my face. She put her hand on my arm and said very quietly, "Don't," I said. She did that on purpose. My sister said, "I know, but it's the wedding." I picked up my champagne flute again. I held it. I thought about my daughter at 22 eating ramen 4 nights a week because she was sending half her paycheck home to help me after my knee surgery. I thought about her studying for her licensing exam in the parking lot of the restaurant where she waitressed, using the light from the window because she couldn't afford to waste electricity at home. I thought about the phone call she made to me the night she passed, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her, saying, "Mom, I did it, Mom, I did it." I thought about Roberta Haynes in her cream suit saying, "We're going to take good care of you now," as if my daughter were a stray that needed feeding. The MC was moving to set down the microphone. I stood up. I don't entirely remember deciding to do it. I remember my legs straightening and my hand going up and my voice saying clearly and calmly, "Excuse me, I'd like to say something as well." There was a small scramble. The MC looked uncertain. My sister made a sound beside me that I chose to ignore. My daughter's eyes found mine across the room, and I saw something flicker there. Fear, maybe, or hope, or both. The MC handed me the microphone. I smoothed the front of my dress. I took a breath. "My name is Lorene," I said, "and I am Amanda's mother." Quiet laughter. A few people smiled. Good energy for the moment. I've been sitting here listening to some wonderful things being said about this day, about this family, about my daughter, and I want to add a few things. I looked at Roberta. She was still smiling that smile, expecting, I think, a sweet little speech from the school teacher from Tennessee. "First," I said, "I want to say that my daughter is the most remarkable person I have ever known, not because of what she's overcome, not because she worked hard to get here, but because of who she is. She is generous, and she is fierce, and she is honest, and she is kind in ways that don't make the news because she doesn't do them for credit. She does them because that's who she is." Applause. Genuine, this time. I also want to gently correct something. I kept my voice pleasant, warm even. Someone mentioned tonight that my daughter didn't grow up with advantages. I'd like to offer a different perspective. I paused. Amanda grew up in a home with a mother who loved her without condition. She grew up with a father who taught her to change a tire and balance a checkbook and look people in the eye when she spoke to them. She grew up in a neighborhood where people left casseroles on your porch when you were sick and shoveled your driveway without being asked. Those are advantages. Those shaped her. More applause. Someone in the back said, "Yes, I was not done." Now, I shifted slightly. I also want to share something because I think honesty is important, especially at the beginning of a family. Roberta's smile tightened, just slightly. I've spent some time these past few months getting to know the Haynes family, and I've been curious about them, the way any mother would be, about the family her child is marrying into. And I did what I've always done when I want to understand something. I smiled. I read. A few laughs. Good. I was particularly interested in Haynes Development Corporation, the family business, because my son-in-law has spoken so warmly about it, the legacy, the tradition, and it's quite a company, quite a history. Sterling shifted in his seat. I was especially interested in a project from 2009, the Ridgecrest Affordable Housing Initiative in Buncombe County, federal funds, community development block grants, about $4.3 million in total. The room had gone very still. Now, those of us who grew up in that part of North Carolina remember when the Ridgecrest project was announced. There were going to be 112 new housing units for low-income families. There were going to be community centers and playgrounds and mixed-income neighborhoods. It was, if you'll forgive the phrasing, quite admirable. I looked at Roberta. The project was abandoned in 2011. 40 families who'd already been displaced for demolition were left without housing for 7 months. 3 of those families were in my parish. I helped one of them move into a motel off Highway 70 because there was nowhere else for them to go. Complete silence now. Federal investigators looked into what happened to that money. The inquiry was eventually closed without charges, largely because of how the funds had been routed through a series of LLCs. Very clever, very clean, on paper. But the families in my parish, they never did get their housing. The community centers were never built. And Haynes Development, I noticed, had a very good year in 2012. I set the microphone down on the table beside me. I'm not making any accusations, I said clearly into the silence. I'm simply sharing what I read, public records, federal filings, available to anyone who's curious. I picked up my champagne flute to Amanda and her husband. May your home be built on something real. I sat down. The room took approximately 4 seconds to process what had just happened. Then my sister leaned over and whispered, "Oh, Lorene, it was not a compliment. I want to tell you that the rest of the evening was peaceful. It wasn't. There was a period of about 30 minutes that I can only describe as a low-grade crisis." Sterling left the table. Roberta sat very still with an expression I have no words for. 2 of their adult relatives had what appeared to be an urgent, whispered conversation near the bar. My daughter came to me. She came to me first before anything else, and she took both my hands and she said very quietly, "Mom, what did you do?" I said, "I told the truth." She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough." She said, "Why didn't you tell me before?" And that one I had to think about. I said, "Because it wasn't mine to tell before." But when she stood up in front of all these people and talked about where you come from like it was something to be ashamed of, I stopped. I wasn't going to let her do that. "I'm sorry if I made your day harder." My daughter looked at me for a long time, then she hugged me. She held on for longer than you'd expect, and she was crying a little, and she said very quietly into my shoulder, "Those families, the ones from your church." I said, "One of them still sends me a Christmas card." She pulled back and looked at me. Her mascara was a disaster. She didn't care. She said, "Okay." And she went back to her husband. I want to tell you that Sterling and Roberta swept it under the rug, and life went on. To a degree, that's true. The reception continued. People ate. The cake was cut. There was dancing. Life, as it tends to do, kept moving. But some things cannot be put back in the bottle. Within 6 weeks, the story had circulated. Not because I said anything further, I didn't, but because there had been 160 people in that room, and some of them had ties to Buncombe County, and some of them remembered the Ridgecrest project, and some of them had questions of their own that they had simply never thought to ask aloud before. A local journalist, a young woman who'd been a guest of one of my daughter's college friends, reached out to me in November. She'd been working on a piece about community development funding in Western North Carolina for over a year, she said. She'd hit walls. She wanted to know if I'd speak on the record. I said I'd think about it. I thought about the family in the motel off Highway 70. Their 2 little girls who were in my daughter's Sunday school class. The way their mother had apologized to me, apologized, as if it were somehow her fault that the house she'd been promised never materialized. I called the journalist back. The article ran in March. It was thorough. It named names. It included documentation that the journalist had obtained through FOIA requests, records that corroborated a pattern going back further than the Ridgecrest project, touching 2 other counties and 2 other federal funding cycles. Haynes Development Corporation did not have a good spring. Sterling resigned from the board of a civic organization he'd chaired for 11 years. 2 business partners quietly ended their contracts. A county commissioner who had been cozy with the family for 2 decades announced he would not seek re-election. Roberta did not speak to me. She still doesn't. I suspect she won't. Here is what I want to say about that. I did not stand up at my daughter's wedding reception to destroy anyone. I want to be clear about that. That was not the plan. There was no plan. There was only a moment, a very specific moment, where a woman in a cream-colored suit told a room full of people that my daughter should be grateful for being allowed to move up in the world, and something in me that had been very patient for a very long time simply stopped being patient. What I knew about the Ridgecrest project, I'd learned by accident. A retired county clerk I used to carpool with had mentioned it at a church potluck 2 years earlier, offhand, the way people mention old grievances. He'd said the name Haynes and I'd filed it away the way you file things, not knowing if you'll ever need them. When my daughter got engaged, I went looking. Not for ammunition. Honestly, not for that. I went looking because I wanted to understand the family my daughter was marrying into, and what I found troubled me, and I didn't know what to do with it. I still don't know if I did the right thing that day. I know I did a true thing. I know the families in Buncombe County deserve to have that story told. I know that my daughter did not deserve to stand at her own wedding reception and be talked to like she was a charity case. I know that when she called me a week later and said, "Mom, he and I talked about it, really talked about it, and he didn't know the details, he genuinely didn't know all of it." And I heard in her voice that she believed him. I chose to believe that too, because she's my daughter and she's not naive. She never has been. They are still married. He is a good husband to her. He has spent considerable personal effort distancing himself from the business decisions of the previous generation, and I have no reason to doubt his sincerity. What his parents did or didn't do is not the same as who he is. I learned a long time ago that children and parents are separate people. Last Thanksgiving, my daughter and son-in-law came to Knoxville, and we made my mother's recipe for sweet potato casserole and watched football, and my son-in-law fixed the loose step on my back porch that's been a hazard for 3 years and didn't say a word about it, just did it. That's the kind of man he is. I haven't spoken to Roberta since the wedding. I imagine I will, eventually. I have things I'd want to say to her that aren't about Ridgecrest or federal funds or the families in my parish. I'd want to say, your son is a good person. My daughter is a good person. They found each other out of all the people in the world, and that is something worth being humble in front of. I'd want to say, I know you love your son. I know that underneath the posture and the cream suit and the managed smile, you love him in the way mothers love children, which is complicated and consuming, and sometimes gets it wrong. I am not without sympathy for that. But I would also want her to know, and I mean this without bitterness, I have tried very hard to mean it without bitterness, that my daughter did not need rescuing. She did not move up in the world when she married into your family. She moved sideways. Into a different life, a good life, with a person who makes her happy. That's all marriage is, when it's working. That's all it ever needs to be. My girl earned her place everywhere she has ever stood. No one gave it to her. No one gets credit for it. Not even me. I set down her champagne flute at the end of the night, and I drove back to the hotel, and I sat on the edge of the bed in my navy dress, and I thought about her father, about how he used to say that the best thing you can do for a child is tell them the truth and then get out of their way. I hope I did that. I hope when the math is added up, I did more of that than the other thing. The truth does not always arrive gently. Sometimes it shows up in a barn in Asheville with string lights overhead and a microphone in someone's hand and a room full of people who didn't expect it. Sometimes it's inconvenient and uncomfortable, and it makes the cake cutting awkward. But it doesn't stay buried. It never does. It just waits, quietly, until someone decides the moment has come, I decided, and I would decide the same way again.